Whoa, whoopsie. Hey everyone, how's it going? Today is September 8th, 2023, and we have a ton of awesome stories. We have an amazing guest host who's going to help me go through all of them today. And yeah, it's just been an interesting last couple of weeks. Quick, I guess, news. If you haven't already seen the last video I posted on Monday about teaching Bitcoin to 6-year-olds, go do that. Hopefully it will inspire you and other people, if you haven't already, to take the leap into learning Bitcoin, because now it's easier than ever. If a 6-year-old can do it, you can do it. If not, keep watching the show. Eventually, maybe you'll understand what I'm talking about. But today we are covering a whole bunch of really interesting stories. We're talking about Bitcoin's new accounting rule change and how that could affect institutional adoption. We're going to be talking about Vancouver's Bitcoin block party, which was fantastic, more of a local thing. But we'll kind of talk about how, local events are bringing Bitcoiners together in cities and how that's really important, especially in bear markets. We got a bunch of really interesting quickie stories. El Salvador launching an education program to teach Bitcoin in every school. The Safe Banking Act, which would enable basically marijuana companies to operate with banking account rules normally in the US. The book from the FTX CEO, from the author of The Big Short. Macro stuff, Chinese yuan at 16-year lows, a whole bunch of interesting stories. I'll try not to spoil them all at once. But before we dive into that, quick introduction to our guest here, Boomer. How's it going?
Thanks for having me. Doing great. How you doing?
Good. So I've heard you've started to make your way around podcasts. We met briefly in Toronto a couple of months ago at the Canadian Bitcoin conference. But yeah, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're looking forward to talking about this week.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of time to chat back in Toronto. You were buzzing around so much. Like I was telling people about
I kind
you
of
a
always
little
have
bit.
to do that. I have to network too much. I don't like it. I
You
like
were
to
one of
just
the
do the
hardest working guys at that conference. Like you had your camera in hand the entire time, running around, talking to people, taking pictures, doing interviews, doing pictures. Oh, it was great. It was a great event too, right? Toronto was awesome.
Yeah, super cool event. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to Friday afternoon talking Bitcoin with another Canadian Bitcoiner, going over the news. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, so you have a background in economics, right? You're not just a film school major like me.
No, I'm one of the I'm a student of the Keynesian school who's seen the light.
Seen the light, seen the Bitcoin light. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's a lot of deprogramming going on. I know that I get the chance to talk to people who are very, very skeptical about Bitcoin on a regular basis. And even to this day, like I still don't feel like I have the tools to disarm them completely from like a person-to-person standpoint. You almost have to come equipped with, a book to give or something like that, or have at least an hour of conversation time before you can try and get into people's heads that no, Bitcoin's not crypto and no, Bitcoin's not a scam. What are your kind of like go-to? What is like your method of dealing with people in person who just immediately call Bitcoin a scam?
Well, everybody has their own touch points, right? Everybody has their own pain points. So you got to really understand where they're coming from first, right? And once with that, ideally you match that up with one of your strengths. Like I've always been a bit of a gold bug. So like that's the one I use is the digital gold thing. And I know you hate that one. I know you don't like it. But that's how I often talk to people who are skeptical about Bitcoin. I also like going into the energy side because that's where I'm comfortable talking about. Like I'm comfortable talking about Bitcoin and its relationship with energy. But I think it just really depends on the person. And what they're feeling. It's not that hard to find a pain point these days, right? With inflation where it's at now, and you just kind of ask people, well, how are things going with the system the way it's going now? And do you think the system would be a little bit better if people couldn't print money with a couple of keystrokes? I think that's a great place to get people started.
Yeah, and I think like a really good core question to start out with people is just to ask them, like, is inflation necessary? Is it necessary to have theft built into money? Because I think it's pretty easy to explain and to get people to agree with you that inflation is a form of theft. It's a form of silent taxation on, people who are holding the dollar above, other assets.
I call it time theft.
Yeah,
I call it time theft, and money is just a representation of your energy and your time. And as inflation increases, well, that's taking your time. because it requires more and more of your time, more and more of your energy to buy that same amount of goods. I find a lot of those words like theft, it kind of scares people sometimes. When people are already predisposed to thinking that Bitcoin is this bad thing anyway. So I try to avoid those words like theft, but I do see how they're valuable.
Yeah, I've been called a libertarian kook by a couple of people when I try to explain Bitcoin, and I try and always figure out like how do I avoid that label? Obviously, people are going to call you whatever they want to call you, but how do you avoid setting yourself up for that, I guess, designation?
I'm a little bit less of a libertarian, and I understand the role of government somewhat. I think we could I think we've gone a little bit too far. I do think that, but I do believe that some form of governance is how humans always kind of end up in the end, right? Like the idea of having no government, the ultimate libertarian ideal. I don't know if that would be great for most people. I think most people kind of would naturally create their own government if they were in that situation.
Yeah,
but to each their own.
People do always trend towards some form of governance, whether it's in the family or in a community or some sort. So this idea that we're all going to live, independently, individually, and fully self-sovereign without the need for one another is always a little kooky to me. But I think there's limitations, right? I think there's always a fine balance in every kind of sector of life. Speaking of kooky libertarians, we had no, I'm just joking on that. We had a Bitcoin block party here in Vancouver. I'll pull up a short little clip of that. Here we go. Little promo, I believe our friend Murdoch Media put together here. I don't know if the audio is playing or not. Curtis there. Seb Bunny killing it. Yes. Anyway, won't play that for too long. The whole point is the year is 2023. Bitcoin has gone sideways for, I don't know, 5 months now. And I asked the poll, I'm super curious. I'll check on the results later in the show. I asked people, like, how often do you check the Bitcoin price anymore? I know I got a big audience of Bitcoiners, and it feels like the more into Bitcoin you are versus like more like a passive investor, it's almost like the less you look at the price over time.
Absolutely.
Because you just don't care. Like, you're in it for the technology, you're in it for the cultural movement behind it. You're in it for learning more than you are for number go up. Number go up's fun when it's breaking to new highs, but in the interim, when it's not doing that, it almost fades away into the background. How do you feel about that? Do you check the
number
price
go down? I check the price more than I should, but I'm of the mind, like, I don't want number go up. I want number go down. I want more sats. The lower the price goes, the more sats I get to DCA. So I'm of the mind that, like, it can keep coming down. I'm just happy to see it go down. Down.
Yeah, same thing here. I remember I used to actually play this. Well, I still play it a little bit. This game called Coin Hunt World, and it's sort of like a Pokemon Go thing where you walk around in real life, and it shows you on a map, and you go to these different spots. And the game was set to give you like 10 cents of Bitcoin to $1 worth of Bitcoin, no matter what answer you got in a trivia place. So the amount of sats you had was always floating. And when Bitcoin dumped, you actually got more sats. And so ever since playing that game, I've been programmed to be excited when the price goes down, because it just means I can either get more sats for free on any of these things that give you, Bitcoin based on like a fiat amount, or, just stacking regularly, you get a little bit more bang for your buck. Your cash back on your ShakePay card or whatever is a little bit better. Your Beaver Bitcoin weekly dollar cost averaging gets a little bit better. It's nice if you're a Bitcoiner, but yeah, obviously frustrating if you have a lot of eggs in that basket and have been hoping for it to go up, right?
And you're excited either way, right?
Yeah,
you get excited either way if it goes up or it goes down.
You got into Bitcoin. You told me you got into Bitcoin around 2020, 21, right?
Yeah, right at the end of 2020. First started doing the work at the end of 2020, and bought my first bit of Bitcoin, I think, in April of 2021.
So, so are you up on your Bitcoin, or do you feel like you're kind of like break even?
Probably right at even. I'd have to check. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you
I
don't
dollar
know. That's
cost
the best
average.
part. The best part is if you don't even know.
I know that my Sats balance has continued to go up throughout the whole thing. So that's all that really matters, right? Is what's your balance in Sats? And I've managed to keep my balance in Sats increasing.
So I remember, I think it was Stanley Druckenmiller or Paul Tudor Jones was saying, when I first started looking into Bitcoin 2018, 2019, one of the things that stood out to me was that when Bitcoin dropped 75%, something like 80% of people didn't sell like
Yeah.
a little bit, didn't care at all. And he was saying like, wow, that's a really interesting investor base. And I think of it this cycle, you along with all these other, Bitcoiners who kind of found it during the COVID period and maybe got in a little bit later are basically, break even or maybe at a loss, but now you're 2, 3 years into it and you don't
Yeah.
care. And,
Exactly.
if cycles repeat themselves, it's really only up from here, but everyone's in good spirits. There have been people who've been flushed out, exchanges, and lots of lessons to be learned. But the core Bitcoiners and the new ones that came in 21 have only seen it go down, really. And they've only seen NGD number go down, and the spirits seem as good as ever. Even if Bitcoin's doing nothing or if it's going down, people are so interested in the community around it, coming to these meetups. And yeah, I think again, it's just like history repeats itself once again. There's some stats I'll pull up to back that up too. But people, the core Bitcoiners are hodling. They don't care. They know where the puck is going, right?
Hash rate is up. The amount of cool stuff out there, more and more businesses are being made or are accepting Bitcoin. More and more content creators every single week, it seems.
Yeah.
There's the only thing that's going down is the price in dollars. Everything else is going up, right? More and more meetups, more and more like the social layer being built out, like a Orange Pill app, things like that. There's always new stuff being made. So everything's going up except price. Bull
And I
market.
think like one of the common retorts to this would be, well, that's just like bag holder speak, right? I'll bring up a comment here. What do I say? Well, we're all screwed if we sell and say fiat, so we might as well keep stacking and die on that hill until we win. And I come from a trading community, and they always say, when you have a losing position, you get rid of it, right? But I mean, there's histories of people holding investments down major percentages, Bitcoin being one of those assets. But think of things like Amazon and Apple and
Yep.
anybody buying things right before 2008 who had to hold through 3, 4, 5, 6 year periods before they even got to remotely break even. The thing that really matters is the properties of the asset that you're holding.
Yep.
So when you hold something like Bitcoin, it's finite. And so you might see the fiat price day to day is declining, but relative to other things people might bag hold, there's no dilution in the supply, or it's at 3 Bitcoin a block basically of newly issuing supply. Point being is that you can call people who hold Bitcoin through thick and thin bag holders, but ultimately that patience is what sets the floor. That patience is what sets the next potential highs, because the longer that we wait out Bitcoin between 16 to 30 to 40 to 50K, I think, the longer that we're going to sit through it when it's going to 100 or 200. That's just my 2 cents.
I don't see Bitcoin as an investment. To me, I see
No.
it as savings. I see it as savings. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about trading, I also come from a trading background. Yes, you get rid of your investments when before they get out of hand, right? I don't see holding Bitcoin as an investment. I see it as savings.
Yeah.
Just like, I know you don't like comparing it to gold, but a gold coin, having a gold coin and keeping it for generations, that's how I view my Sats.
Yeah, it's generational wealth, because we know, completely sure. We don't know what the fiat price will be 50 to 100 years from now, but we know the Bitcoin protocol and the engineering behind it is meant for it to last 100+ years into the
Yes.
future. We can say with some percentage of sureness that, oh yeah, Apple will be here 100 years in the future. But it's not 100%. I think anybody, saying it with 100% certainty would be crazy. The same way that I think people in the 1800s thought the railroad companies would be here 100 years from then, and look at where they are now, right? We can see all these other technologies right now and think, and these other companies and think, oh yeah, like Google, Amazon, like they'll all be here 100 years from now. But we can't say that with 100% certainty. We don't know. They're centralized institutions. Governments can shut them down, whatever. Bitcoin, decentralized protocol, it'll be here through thick and thin. It'll be here if meteorites start hitting the earth nonstop. Someone will run a node somewhere, hopefully. Maybe we'll have one in outer space. But we can say with certainty, we know it'll be here 100%, 100 years from now. And so that is really why people are so passionate about it, I think, is because it does present that opportunity for generational wealth that not only won't be diluted, but will fully exist with 100% certainty 100 years from now.
And fewer Bitcoin on the exchanges every single day. Like, what are we at now? What's the balance on the exchange? Like, you sent me a document.
Let's dive into that. So this is one of the segments I wrote today, and it was, does anyone care anymore? Does anyone care about the price of Bitcoin? Because the volatility, let's just pull this up here. This is total spot volume is down at 4-year lows. So when Bitcoin was trading at $3,000, it was doing about as much volume in dollar amounts as it's doing today, which is pretty incredible. And today we're sitting at, about 7 or 8 times that floor. So very few Bitcoin are moving at this price. Dylan LeClaire rightfully says, when you have volumes this low and when you have liquidity this thin, it means that moves in either direction can be exaggerated. I think we saw that a couple of weeks ago when Bitcoin dumped like 10% downwards, but it cuts on the way up too. And I don't know, can't predict the future, but you look at these stats too, something like 80% of all Bitcoins or 70 or 80% have not moved in over a year at this point. Bitcoiners are ruthless. They just stack, they keep it in cold storage. And it makes it very hard for people to kind of have these price predictions of like, oh, we're going down to 14K before we go to 100K. It's like, well, you don't know. You don't know what the maximum pain point is for Bitcoiners to pull it out of cold storage and sell it. But from the people I talk to, there's no level. And for me, I find it similar. I have a stack of Bitcoin that I will hold essentially to zero. Does that make me a religious sell it? Maybe, but there are amounts of Bitcoin that will not move no matter what.
People don't
no price.
People fail to realize that price is made at the margin. So we're only talking about a couple of Bitcoin, a couple of million Bitcoin, I guess, 1.5 million or so, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah,
dictating the price.
Exactly.
And
that's less than 10% of the supply.
It's nothing. It's the equivalent of, like, in real estate. People understand it in real estate, that if you have a neighborhood full of houses and only one of them is for sale, then the value of all the houses in that neighborhood is kind of dictated by what that one house sells for. Bitcoin is the same way.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the same way. So just because somebody is willing to get rid of their sats at whatever the price is now, 26, 27,000, that doesn't mean that all 21 million Bitcoin are valued at $26,000. Like, I'm not selling my sats for 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. And I think I'm in the majority.
I'm one of those unholy Bitcoiners that has a price where I would sell my Bitcoin on the upside. But you know what that money goes towards? That money goes towards making Bitcoin content.
It's money.
So
at the end of the day, it's money.
It flows back to itself in some way.
Yeah. Like, if you want to sell your sats to buy a house and buy a car and buy some land, whatever, live your life. Like, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is money. Like, money is, you're free to use it however you want and spend it however you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where, like, I had a segment when I was talking on Simply Bitcoin the other week where I was getting a little bit tired of everyone referring to Bitcoin as digital gold. Not saying that it doesn't fit that moniker, but it's that when we push that as like the single narrative that is the reason why you should be adding it to portfolio or buying it or whatever, it discourages, I think, experimentation from people. And I think part of the beauty in understanding Bitcoin is seeing all the things that you can do with it. Instant settlement on things like Lightning, super cheap transactions, being able to move money with like 12 or 24 words. There's things like that, which I fear, and it'll happen inevitably when a lot of people gain exposure to Bitcoin, that they'll never get to experience. And I fear too that eventually they will experience it, but it'll be out of, getting rug pulled by an ETF or putting it in custody somewhere else. But there is a fear a lot of people have when they interact with Bitcoin on a protocol level for the first time, like having to copy and paste addresses and checking each
Absolutely.
digit to make sure it lines
Absolutely.
up so you don't send it to the wrong place, and setting test transactions before you send like 5 or 6 figures worth. But I think that's sort of the process everyone has to go through
Absolutely.
in
Yes.
understanding that we as a
Yes.
society have become so reliant on third parties to manage our money for us that we feel naked when we start doing it with our own. And I think that moment of realizing how much dependency we have on third parties is part of the eye-opening, the orange pilling process, not just understanding inflation and all these things, but understanding what little responsibility we've kind of grown up with in terms of managing our own wealth for this, long stretch of time that we've had banks. So, yeah.
I think it was Robert Breedlove who said it, but it could be somebody else. I'm not quite sure. Don't say that Bitcoin is digital gold. Say that gold is analog Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Because
gold is pretty Bitcoin.
calling Bitcoin digital gold really is selling Bitcoin short. I agree with you.
Yeah.
That is scratching the surface of what this protocol is and what this movement is and what all of this is. That being said, I do believe it's a good way to get people in the door. So we can agree to disagree.
I think the way that I just like to pitch it, and it's all about messaging in some way, is I like to talk about it as the evolution of money. And when people think,
yes,
what does that mean? Like when something evolves, does it get better, faster, stronger, smarter? And what does that look like in money? That's when people start asking questions. Because when you say digital gold, and I fear that too, there's a subsect of people that think if you like gold, you're a cult member, right? Oh, you like gold, that thing that we ditched in the 70s because we couldn't make enough of it based on how much we wanted to spend. Oh, you're one of those guys, but for this Bitcoin thing, great. And so when I say it's the evolution of money, it's like some people can look at that as like hocus pocus, but more than less, I get people asking like, what does that actually mean? And then I ask, well, what is money to begin with, right?
Maybe Bitcoin puts us back on the proper evolutionary track of money, where maybe gold was correct. And when we went off gold, we went off course. And Bitcoin allows us to get back on course.
Well, gold has never really fully worked as money. That's what I've always viewed it as, is it works in the intermediate, but eventually, as long as a government has to issue paper notes, a layer on top of it that they have, full control over, they can essentially demonetize the gold in one way or another. And when you have a protocol that can handle the part that the government's supposed to handle, the second layer, but it can handle itself in a decentralized way, then you don't need the government. And that's what's really important. I sometimes I think about how, I don't think Bitcoin is truly finished until the layer twos are finished. We have to get this transactional element of Bitcoin right, because the more that we delay and the more that we don't pay attention to it and the less that we experiment with it, the more the inclination will be, well, let's just let the governments handle the layer two once again, right? And 50 to 100 years down the line, if we don't figure out how to do really good layer twos on Bitcoin without needing a government to issue paper notes or to verify on top of it, then we lead ourselves to the same problem with gold again. And I understand, but you can take self-custody of your Bitcoin, but that's not going to work in, a population of billions of people when, block space is as rare as it will be 50 to 100 years from now. So we really can't cede that layer two territory, I think, to centralized institutions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also believe that gold failed because it was not very well divisible.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't just a self-custody. Like obviously self-custody, yes. Self-custody was a major reason why gold fails, but also the ability to divide. What are we going to do? Like you'll get your hair cut and you got to like scrape off like a piece of gold to a powder.
The divisibility, the fungibility of it, the way to verify if it's real or not too.
Yeah, like there were flaws, definitely flaws. And Bitcoin fixes these flaws.
Yeah. Well, Bitcoin fixes the divisibility and it to some extent and the fungibility on the layer one, but I think the layer two is necessary to make it spendable. Right now we don't care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not possible. Well, even when we had the ordinal stuff going on a few months ago, like transaction fees became incredibly high on chain. Like it was making layer twos difficult. Like opening lightning channels became incredibly difficult. So the level 2 wasn't even ready for that level of transaction fee, let alone the base layer. So I agree with you 1,000%.
I think it's so important that we encourage people to be curious about all these other layers.
Absolutely.
Because I think the moment that we become complacent and think it's digital gold, we figured it out, everyone's going to buy it to the moon, there's only 21 million, we're going to wake up one day never having transacted Bitcoin, having put it ourselves in a cold storage, and then realizing that, oh, it can't really be used as money. We ceded that territory to someone else, and I think it's possible. So yeah. All right. Let's dive.
Hold your own keys, guys. Hold your own keys.
Hold your own keys. You're in the privileged group of people in the first 14 years of Bitcoin who will be able to do that on the first layer. Don't forget that. Some Bitcoin news here. So the U.S. Financial Accounting Standards Board, organization responsible for establishing accounting and reporting standards for organizations that follow generally accepted accounting principles, i.e. GAAP accounting, has unanimously approved rules for valuing crypto assets in company financial statements. So if you're not a CFO or somebody who messes with company earnings and all this, this is a pretty significant development, because essentially, if you are a company like MicroStrategy and you added Bitcoin to your balance sheet, up until this point, it was classified as an intangible asset. So think about something like a patent or a copyright, something that you know is valuable, but you can't really find the liquidity for. And so the accounting board looked at Bitcoin the same way, which sort of didn't make sense, because we can kind of find what the value of Bitcoin is at any given moment just looking at spot exchanges. So it's not something that was not liquid and hard to verify the price and the value of. And so under the original rules, when you held Bitcoin, you could mark down the value of it. You could input, I bought it at this price, and if it went down, you could kind of claim a capital loss for it. But because it was an intangible asset, you couldn't claim a capital gain on it.
Yeah.
So it would only work one way when it was on your balance sheet, like MicroStrategy would do. They would claim losses, and Tesla would claim losses on their Bitcoin holdings, but they could never claim gains. And so this, according to Michael Saylor, has prevented a lot of companies from adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet. There's a whole litany of reasons for that, but they have come out in the middle of this sideways crab boring market. Oh, my camera froze here. Give me 1 second. I'll reboot. Here we go.
I would take over and start explaining, but I don't really know that much about this stuff. All
right. Sorry, just to recap. So rewind the clock. Basically, a company like MicroStrategy could only write down losses for their Bitcoin because it was declared an intangible asset. Now they can claim capital gains when these rules go into effect. So essentially, if you're a company and you have cash flow and these other assets on your balance sheet, now by holding Bitcoin, if the price of Bitcoin goes up, you can say, hey, we have increased earnings. We have a good chunk of our treasury in Bitcoin, and therefore we had a good quarter because Bitcoin also had a good quarter. And so this will more accurately help other financial institutions incorporate Bitcoin into their overall income and investment strategy. And I think it's really important because having a one-sided way of marking an asset just doesn't work for institutions. So yeah, now, what do you think of this?
If I'm not mistaken, we use the terms capital gains and capital loss, but it's not really that. Like when we're talking about capital gains and capital losses, we're talking about taxes. This is more about numbers on a balance sheet of optics. I hate to call it optics, but it is kind of optics.
You're right. It's unrealized capital gains.
Unrealized. Yes.
Exactly. Because you wouldn't be disposing of it. If you dispose of it, then you have like a mark price. But when you're not disposing of it, they wouldn't even include the gain of an unrealized,
Exactly. So it's not really a tax thing unless they sell. So I think that's important to kind of understand the difference. What this does is it makes corporate holders of Bitcoin look good in bull markets. So a company like MicroStrategy buys a ton of Bitcoin. In a bear market, they're able to write that off. They're able to write it down on their balance sheet, and they can say that things are getting worse, right? They can sell some off for capital losses or whatever. There's not a whole lot gained there other than the tax side of it from an optic side, from an investor standpoint. But now from an investor standpoint, from a company's marketing perspective, when in a bull market, when the price appreciates, they can make their balance sheet look better because it is better. They have this thing that's gained value, and that can, brighten up a balance sheet. So
Yeah,
I guess
and
I
people,
guess it's a good thing, but it's a little bit of a nothing burger to me. But
it does seem like a nothing burger for sure, for most of us. But I think another thing that's really important here is that a lot of companies will borrow against assets that they hold in reserve against their
exactly,
balance sheet. And now that, FASB or
yeah,
whatever is recognizing, Bitcoin as an
yep, it looks a
asset,
lot better. Yep,
it looks a lot better, and you can actually
yep,
utilize it in your balance sheet too. It's not, again, it's not something intangible like it used to be. So that's good.
yeah, yeah.
Obviously, the price of Bitcoin didn't care, but
Not at all. Zero. Like
that's the
absolutely
price of
nothing.
Bitcoin for you. Um, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of like interesting charts. This is another one. This is Bitcoin's volatility index. Again, record lows here. Just total apathy when it comes to this space. But that's great. You have to look at the bright side. If this is total apathy at 24, 25K, what does the upside look like? We know that when things go to the upside, volatility hits record highs.
So we're
So
about 6 to 8 months away from 8 months from the halving,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
April-ish. Is this
Yeah.
normal to a periods of low volatility when we're this close to the halving? Is it normal?
Um, I'm trying to think about it. Like what was the halving like in 2020? I think the halving in 2020 it was actually super volatile before the halving in 2020 because that was when the COVID
Yeah, we had a ton of
collapse
weird shit
happened.
going on.
And hey, that could be the same thing. We don't know what's going to happen in March 24. So who knows? But I think leading up to all the COVID stuff, I think Bitcoin was pretty sideways for a while. I remember it was like 6,000 to 7,000 for a while. So yeah.
Sideways is good, man. Sideways is
Sideways is
good.
good, man. Patience. It's all about that. Bitcoin will test your patience. It'll test your anxiety. It'll test your ability to be euphoric and your ability to be in complete despair. But once you go through all those emotions at least once, it gets a little bit easier, doesn't it?
If this all you got, like what
That's
we
all
went
you
down
got.
to 16,000. That's all you got. Like,
Yeah. All right, we're going to move into some quickie stories next. But first off, I want to say a shout out to Beaver Bitcoin, who's generously sponsoring my show. We did some cool trivia sponsored by them too. I'll post some of those videos as well. But they are the easiest place to dollar cost average Bitcoin right from your bank account. I like to say it's the perfect place to get your mom or your grandma or your dad or your grandpa dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin in a non-custodial way. They can't get rug pulled, and they can link their BMO, CIBC, whatever they want. So yeah, go check them out. This week's show is brought to you by Beaver Bitcoin. Dollar cost averaging is the most stress-free method to enter the Bitcoin space. And if you're looking for a simplified way of buying Bitcoin in Canada without needing to rely on a custodial exchange, Beaver Bitcoin is your best bet. Beaver Bitcoin lets you set up recurring Bitcoin purchases directly from your Canadian bank account and straight into a Bitcoin address that you control. It's like a savings account in a currency that you actually want, or a Netflix subscription that doesn't suck. And if you don't want to wait to stack sats, Beaver Bitcoin supports instant non-custodial Bitcoin buying via e-transfer as well. Give it a shot today at beaverbitcoin.com. And speaking of having self-custody over things, I got an interesting story here to pull up. I don't know, did you follow this thing with Liberty safes in the last little bit?
No.
So this is an interesting story. This is a story of self-custody that doesn't have to do with Bitcoin. Essentially, there's this company called Liberty Safes, and they make hard safes meant for guns. And on August 30th, 2023, they put out this statement here that they were contacted by the FBI requesting the access code to the safe of an individual which they had a warrant to search their property for. And our company protocol is to provide access codes to law enforcement if a warrant grants them access to a property. After receiving the request, we received proof of the valid warrant, and only then did we provide them with an access code. Liberty Safe had no knowledge of any of the details surrounding the investigation at the time. Liberty Safe is devoted to protecting the personal property and Second Amendment rights of our customers and has repeatedly denied requests for access codes without a warrant in the past. We do not give out combinations without proper legal documentation being provided by authorities. This is a Bitcoin story to me for several reasons, but the main one is essentially that when you have other cryptocurrencies and there's a centralized counterparty, in them, And you might say they're open source, but a lot of them are not really open source. When you have a centralized counterparty, you have a Vitalik Buterin, you have a Consensus, you have all of these companies, a Ripple Labs, all of these things. The ability for them to program backdoors into their code is possible. And that's what makes Bitcoin unique. There are no backdoors. There are no codes that they can give the FBI if they need things seized. It's not like a stable coin like Tether or USDC2, where those agencies can essentially just freeze and blacklist your addresses. And I think, I could be wrong on this, they could even funnel out your USDC into another account against your will as well. And this is a really important story. I don't know, when you buy a safe like this, if people read, the fine print, they know that they, can have their safe opened if there's a federal warrant against their will. But this is what Bitcoin's all about. And it's something that, again, like, people don't understand these things until it happens to them. But this is a big shock for the, the gun owning community. Essentially, this Liberty Safe company, one of the most well-known companies in this space, now has politicized basically access to their safe. So the individual in question that had his safe open was somebody involved in the January 6th protests. I don't know if they broke a law, but if you look at, basically the scope of that case, there are not many people who were charged in that case with more than just, mischief or, maybe breaking and entering a place. There were no, killings during the January 6th, events. It's a very politicized thing. But the point being is, essentially, you think you have something safe when you don't. And you don't have those guarantees unless you can verify the physical things or the digital things that you have to see if there are backdoors. And so, while something like Ethereum is open source, we can see all the codes. We could see if there is a backdoor involved in these things. The point being, as long as there are individuals or corporations behind these things, and they, control some majority of the network power and the decisions to do things, then you can have, access to your funds or rights basically stripped away. That was my first real introduction into what decentralization really means. Because when I got into Bitcoin and Ethereum, it was back in 2016, 2015. And that was precisely when the DAO hack happened. And the Ethereum organization at that time decided, hey, some hacker hacked some third-party protocol that Ethereum was involved with, and they stole, 10% of all the Ethereum. Let's fork the value of their coins away. We don't want this as like a stain on our community. And the majority of Ethereans and the Ethereum Foundation agreed to do this. And it just brings up a really important argument. You might be in support of, them doing that because it could have jeopardized the protocol forever. You might say, hey, that jeopardizes immutability, and you'd also be correct. But the point is that this cannot happen with Bitcoin. There are no backdoors. It's open source. And the people who defend the Bitcoin network, the nodes, the miners, would never do something or prove anything like this. So yeah, it's my rant on that. What do you think? I think you might have frozen too. Boomer, I lost you. There were, I'm going to message you here, Boomer, real quick. There were deaths on January 6th. Yeah, I believe that there were. I still think that the majority of people who are being prosecuted right now for their involvement were not involved in that level of criminal activity, manslaughter, or third-degree murder or anything like that. Most of the people that were charged in the January 6th riots were for rioting, essentially. And a lot of them have been already proven innocent in a lot of cases. But yeah, I'm not sure what happened with the gun owner there. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But the point is like, you're buying something from a private company. You should know your rights. I don't know if Liberty Safe was upfront about this stuff, but it's important to understand, the difference between something that is self-sovereign and something that is controlled by a third party. And I think this is a really good real life example of the difference between those things. We lost Boomer here, unfortunately, probably just like a camera issue or a bandwidth thing. I'll add him back when he comes back, but we'll have some more quickie news to get to here. Try and keep some more positive stories too. There's a lot of messy stuff. Germany's ruling left-green liberal coalition passes controversial bill to phase out oil and gas heating systems. We got you back?
I think I'm back.
There we go.
Did we get rugged?
We got rugged because I said January 6th. I gotta not say that. Oops, I did it again. I was
Joking,
just
not
going over here.
joking.
Germany's ruling left coalition passes a controversial bill to phase out oil and gas heating systems. Now, if you haven't followed what's been going on in Germany, they had such a shortage of natural gas that they actually had to turn on coal plants a year ago. So that's kind of interesting. And now they've decided again to step in the opposite direction, somewhat undermining themselves by phasing out oil and gas heating systems, which will essentially mean that they will be using electrical based heating systems, which are so much more demanding on the grid. And who knows? I mean, relying on purely electrical energy when you don't have a lot of nuclear to heat your homes essentially means that you're going to put a ton of stress on the hydro part of your grid, the wind part of your grid, and the solar part of your grid, and the geothermal to essentially heat an entire country. So I'm sure that there's more to this bill that meets the eye, but I think, this whole climate thing has always been a bit cultish to me. I understand that there are, emergences with carbon in the atmosphere that are human caused, but can we at least agree? Can we at least be on like the same ground that oil and gas heating systems are basically the right choice for a majority of the globe? Especially in places where the temperature gets down to negative 10 degrees and you have clouds, for half the year where you only have about 6 hours of sunlight and you have intermittent wind. Can we not agree that, maybe we can emit some carbon dioxide for oil and gas? It's
And maybe
crazy
we
to me.
should take a common sense approach to all this. Like maybe we should
Yeah.
take our time and review and learn from our mistakes. If we make a mistake, then we course adjust.
Mm.
This is something I am following. It's something in my other life. I'm deeply involved in this type of stuff. This is some scary stuff, and I don't want to argue climate change with anybody. Like I know what I believe. I know what I think. I am open to having my mind changed. My mind changes about things all the time, but we shouldn't mess around with energy. More energy is a good thing. The more energy that we can harness, the better our species will be.
You know
I
what's
can
one
be.
thing?
Go ahead.
One thing that bugs me about some of the climate people is that they believe that humans have caused climate change kind of unwillingly. I think that even if you believe that, humans have emitted carbon dioxide and other things to the atmosphere, we haven't done this with a lot of intentionality. It's been a byproduct of the evolution of our species. But they also believe that by making conscious decisions, we can reverse it. And that has no root in science at all. There are all these claims that like, oh, if we move to this, we can reduce our carbon footprint. But these things do not reverse, temperatures. There's no evidence for this ever in history of humans consciously trying to reduce a carbon footprint and having a verifiable outcome of them actually changing the temperature and changing weather events, right? And yet
I'm
they
old.
go to all the climate, the
Yep.
climate agenda deniers, and they say, oh, you guys are all like rooted in unscientific theory when they're proposing things that have never been tested before as scientific theory on the basis of like, well, if we just lower our carbon footprint, all of this stuff goes back to normal. And I just think it's nuts.
Well, normal. No one even really knows what
Yeah,
normal
what
is.
is
We
normal,
we
right?
don't know that, and we don't know the weather tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have sophisticated models enough to know precisely what the weather is going to be like in 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to comprehend that we can comprehend what is going to happen in 10 years from now. I'm old enough to remember acid rain. That was a thing when I was a kid. The acid rain was going to kill us. Then the ozone layer was going to kill us, and then global
Global
warming was
cooling.
going. I'm not quite that old. That was a little bit before
That
my
was a test.
time. Like, yeah, global cooling was a little bit before I was born, and then global warming, and then now we're at climate change, and now we're at like carbon. Like I don't know. I'm of the mind that we should respect the earth. It's the only earth we have. Like this is the only one. We should be doing everything we possibly can to do the right things for the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But at what cost and for what reason? I mean, if we could move every type of electricity generation to non-emitting forms, be awesome. Be absolutely great. It would take generations for us to do that. It would take decades. I think it's great. I think it's a great, it's a good to aspire to be able to do that. I'm not against renewable energy where it makes sense. I'm not against any type of renewable where there's a proper cost benefit analysis being done, and that is an economic and environmental cost benefit analysis. I don't like the narratives where it's not based in science, and it's based in ideology. I don't like that. I think we should take common sense approaches wherever we can and make things better wherever we can. That's just my 2 cents on that.
I think there's a tendency of people from the other side who see, what our opinions might be on this, or maybe my opinion in particular, to also think that, oh, these people don't want to see a decrease in pollution. And that's where I really need to correct people. And that's where I think maybe we can all be doing a better job of this as people who don't think that the earth warming by a couple degrees is the end of life as we know it. I think if we put more of our time and energy into reducing pollution and littering and trash and all of these things, consumerism, rampant consumerism, which is really the cause of, disastrous declines in ecosystems. When we reduce that, we have a way bigger impact than setting these ESG goals of reducing, this carbon boogeyman, right? I appreciate when companies are saying, hey, let's get our whole cohort of people to go pick up garbage on the beach. Yeah.
Yes.
I agree with that. I don't think anybody should disagree with that. Instead, we put out all this time and energy into catastrophizing. And it's just like, change that. Stop wasting your energy on that. Stop having TED Talks about how the world's going to end in 12 years. Go out and pick up some goddamn garbage. That's a way better use of your time.
I agree. I definitely agree. It's ideology, right? It's people that are basing the groupthink and ideology, and once it starts going one direction, it's very hard to change their mind. And there is confirmation bias with a lot of this stuff, and there are misaligned incentives all over the place. Common sense, common sense. Plant more trees. There's another one. People talk about we emit too much carbon. We emit too much carbon dioxide. Okay, well, imagine if we had this amazing technology that absorbed carbon dioxide from the air and then emitted oxygen, and it provided shade, and it was a home for animals and birds and squirrels and stuff. The tree is an amazing technology. Plant more trees, right? Mitigate methane wherever you can, right? Methane is 80 times more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide is. So wherever you can, mitigate the amount of methane that you emit, cut that, and emit carbon dioxide instead of methane, and you're going in the right direction. Do these things.
Well, and I get it. Like people, will protest en masse. We've had multiple climate protests here in Vancouver, and you'll get thousands of people marching the street with signs, right? Saying, decarbonize all that. And you know what happens after those protests? They all go get lunch at Starbucks and McDonald's, and they use more plastic, and maybe they brought their reusable cup, but I don't think all of them brought reusable cups. But maybe instead of spending, 5-6 hours holding up traffic, keeping traffic idling, which actually adds more carbon in the atmosphere, go out with your 1,000+ people and completely clean a beach. Go into a forest, completely clean a forest. And I get it. When you are
call that a protest.
The idea of protesting is you want to be heard as a collective. It makes your voice bigger when you work together.
You would be
people
heard.
Don't want to put in the work. That's the ultimate problem, is people don't want to put in the work because the work goes unrecognized. You spend a day cleaning up a beach, you're not going to get an article in the post. But if you hold up traffic on a bridge for 5 hours, that's a story. And maybe you have a chance to get interviewed for that, right?
What if you did get what if you did get a story in the post for cleaning up the beach? What if we did that? We properly aligned incentives that way, right? And call that a protest. You want to protest climate change? Awesome. As long as you're doing it peacefully, do you, right? Do it productively. Go clean up a beach. And how awesome would it be if the Post or the Sun or the Globe and Mail, whoever, would cover those types of protests? Oh, look at these protesters cleaning up a beach.
Yeah,
that would be awesome.
Yeah, and you can't no one can really oppose that, right? Have your climate protest at the beach and say, hey, we also cleaned up 1,000 kilograms of litter while we were protesting.
Yeah.
That's a way more productive use of their time. Then I would sit and actually hear you guys out a little bit more, rather than you just actually causing a net gain in maybe carbon to the atmosphere, which is a little hypocritical. But
Who
I
knows?
don't know. We don't live in a perfect world, but you know what? Like this always ties back into Bitcoin. This is what Bitcoiners do. Is there's a lot of people who understand the inequalities in politics and the economy and money and all these things, and we can complain to high heaven, but the Bitcoiners are doing something, and it's like we all can be doing a little bit more. We can
Yes.
all be putting in the proof of work to the causes and the things that
Yes.
we believe in.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Bitcoin
Cool.
is the most environmentally friendly technology that we've ever seen.
Yes, it's an
I truly
anti-consumerist
believe that.
technology. It's an
Yes.
anti-consumerist technology, and that is the only way to declutter the earth, in my opinion. You
And
have to reverse consumerism.
it properly aligns incentives with regards to
Yeah.
energy. And more energy is not bad. More energy
Yeah.
is very good. More energy. We should be producing more and more and more and more and more energy to the no end.
Direct correlation to human abundance. The more energy you have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more you
Speaking
produce,
of
the more we can mine Bitcoin.
speaking of good energy, El Salvador, by the way, really interesting case. I don't know if you've looked into the way that they've produced energy, but since Bukele came into office, they're now net energy exporters, and they increased their energy production by about 300% in the last year, which is kind of interesting. So you know that is in line with their entire society being more prosperous in the last few years. They are also launching educational programs to teach Bitcoin in every single public school, which is really nice. This to me was like the big thing that was lacking when El Salvador launched their whole, legal tender Bitcoin thing. It was like, here's Chivo wallet, go figure it out, look up some YouTube tutorials. And meanwhile, all the grassroots initiatives are trying to figure out like, how do we teach Bitcoin to people after it was made a law? 2 years later, they're finally starting to say, hey, this is a generational thing. Bitcoin is here to stay. Let's start teaching it in public schools so that people can get jobs. People can understand, the importance of sound money. So yeah, it's a really nice step to see that finally taking place in El Salvador.
Those Bitcoiners teaching those kids are really doing Satoshi's work. So shout out
Yeah.
to all the educators out there. Like you mentioned one at the beginning of the show, Seb Bunny. Shout out to Seb and everybody else at Looking Glass Education doing absolutely great work.
Amazing work. Yeah. All right. Marijuana is not quite being legalized in the US, and I got to not say that word on my stream because YouTube picks up that word. But essentially, that industry is getting a safe banking act. Now, this has been in the talks for years. Essentially, the problem that these companies, these green plant companies have in the US is that because the drug or the thing that they're producing is under Schedule 3 or Schedule 1 or however it works in the US, as companies, they cannot claim losses in their net profit calculation. So whatever the cost of business is, you cannot use that as a deduction for your net profit. So essentially, your gross revenue has to be higher than your cost of revenue, I believe, in order to be profitable in the US. I might have butchered that, but essentially there's no write-offs for that industry. That's the easiest way to explain it. No write-offs for that industry. You can't write off anything because you're dealing with this substance, right? So they're trying to change that bit by bit in the US. The first step now is that they're passing this law, this act called the Safe Banking Act, which will allow federal banks and federal institutions, banking institutions, to provide banking services for these businesses so they don't have to go offshore, or they don't have to have their banking businesses in Canada, which a lot of them have. Now they're not allowed to discriminate based on those businesses. And then that will lead eventually into decriminalization as well over the long term. But yeah, it's promising in the US. That was like the only thing in the last week or two that was kind of bullish MSOS, which is a stock that it's an ETF that tracks the largest marijuana producers in America, has had record volume. It's almost doubled since this kind of news has come out. So yeah, I always try and like bring little tidbits into this show from other sectors, but it looks like marijuana is slowly on the path to becoming decriminalized, and that's what's just been so hard to fathom in the States for the longest time. Is like this is like a super bipartisan issue where a lot of conservatives, not the plurality, but a lot of conservatives support descheduling marijuana, and pretty much all Democrats, save for Biden, actually. He's actually one of the few Democrats who's not for decriminalizing marijuana, but most are. So to have all these like bipartisan issues that both sides kind of agree on, that they could pass legislation on tomorrow, not get any headway is pretty ridiculous in the US. But it's nice to see this finally going through.
My entire life, it seems like people have been talking about this plant that we can't become legal. Like it's pretty insane when you see some of the other things out there that are legal, where you can't decriminalize this plant. It's pretty wild.
Pretty wild. And in an age of inflation, marijuana is the shining light of something that only gets cheaper every single year somehow. I remember
I quit.
interview.
I completely quit. I completely quit. I've I've steered clear of it for almost a year.
It's too abundant. That's the problem.
Yes. Yes.
Deflation in action is actually looking at
Yes.
this chart. Look at that. That's what the price of everything will look like on a Bitcoin standard. And it freaks a lot of people out, but you just have to like deprogram yourself to not having to own these things and own the bearer instrument that it's measured in instead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Last quick story here. This one broke not too long ago. Our quick stories are getting into long stories, but you have some thoughts on this. I think you shared an article on this, but blockchain firm Ripple has acquired Fortress Trust, which is a custody platform that actually houses most of Swan, which is a Bitcoin only platform's customer deposits. So now Ripple basically owns Swan's user deposits or owns some custody of their user deposits. What do you think about all that?
I don't know enough right now to have a very strong opinion, but this doesn't smell good. Like I don't like the first impression I get. Like this news broke a couple hours ago, right? Like around lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
And my first impression of it was complete confusion. Like this doesn't make any sense. Like why would Ripple even want to buy Fortress? Like Ripple
I believe Fortress custodies more than just Bitcoin. They're not only Bitcoin. Could be wrong on that. I'll look it up.
But it seems like a strange time for a company like Ripple to be acquiring companies. I don't know. I don't know anything about their financials.
Well, I'll tell you something about their financials.
I haven't been watching XRP charts in a long. It's been a long time since I looked at an XRP chart.
This is how it works. They hold an ungodly amount of XRP, double-digit amount of the supply of XRP, and they're programmatically selling it. And they were programmatically selling it when XRP jumped, 150% when, they sort of won a lawsuit. And so that's probably where the extra money is coming from. And they thought, okay, we got a few extra billion this time from selling. Why don't we pick up something that's in our interest?
So instead of funding smear campaigns against Bitcoin, they're going to buy a company that holds custodial Bitcoin. Like, seems weird.
Yeah.
And how fast
they're gonna make
it all
your Bitcoin
happens.
green. They're gonna make your Bitcoin green, Boomer. They're gonna turn it green with their new technology.
It's how fast it all happened. The Prime Trust stuff to Fortress to now the Ripple stuff. It really makes it, I would be concerned if look I have nothing negative to say about Swan or anybody at Swan. I'm Canadian. I don't use their product. Even if I did, I would hold my own keys. I wouldn't have a custodial. So I'm neutral on that. But if I was a Swan customer and if I was relying on them to be my custodian, I'd be very concerned.
Yeah. I think Corey mentioned that they're going to probably be some news coming out. That's what he mentioned. But yeah, it's interesting.
But hold your own keys, guys. Just go out there. For all you Americans using Swan, hold your own keys. It's not that hard.
For sure. It's not, the thing about holding your own keys is like multi-sig is not, it's a better solution than trusting some company to split the responsibility over multiple people. But the hard thing is like you can't hold your own keys if you're a corporation or your family office, right? You have a financial advisor or somebody with a fiduciary duty to basically be in charge of your assets. And there's no like real protocol for financial advisors to essentially just like, keep like a steel plate in their desk at their office while they manage all your other assets, right? And so they have to use these platforms and these kind of like custody platforms to do what they do, or else they're breaching that trust. So, we're always going to need these custodians in some sense, as long as people still have family. But yeah,
let's not have the custodians owned by Ripple. Like let's
yeah. Well, we can do a better job of it for sure.
Let's do better. Let's do better.
It's kind of interesting in Canada. Like I believe I don't know if there's many Canadian custody companies, but we don't have this problem as much.
I don't think there are any, right?
the way that we have Bitcoin exposure in Canada by large is like we have all these non-custodial companies like Beaver Bitcoin, Bitcoin Well, Bull Bitcoin, and then since we have the ETFs, a lot of Bitcoin are in those ETFs, like
Yes.
quite a bit if
Yeah.
you look at all of them,
Yeah.
and so that's considered like a safe place to have your custody. But someone explained, or I heard this podcast, and they said, look, the way that banking used to work is that they would keep your gold in a vault or whatever, right? And you would pay a small fee in order for that to happen. But it would be a trusted party, and they wouldn't be rehypothecating it. And I think in Bitcoin eventually we'll need to go back to that standard. We will need custodians because you'll have shared
Yeah.
custody, shared ownership of something, and a multi-sig doesn't cut it. And so the problem now is that the Fed, this company Custodia Bank, came out and said we want to offer that service. People can just pay us like a small fee per year to custody the Bitcoin. The Fed was like, nah, we don't like that. You're not rehypothecating enough assets, so we don't want you in the banking system. And so the Fed is actually kind of the barricade in the U.S. to having these, kind of like old school style banks. So yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, Coinbase, I think a lot of Canadian companies, I know ShakePay uses Coinbase. I'm not quite sure about some of the other exchanges. Interesting. You got me thinking about, you got me thinking now about the ETFs. I might want to look into where the Canadian ETFs have their Bitcoin. What's the custodian structure there?
Yeah, that's actually a really good thing to look into. I would imagine they must custody it on their own, or have
I don't
something
know.
kind of more internal.
I'm leaning towards saying no. I think I heard somebody say I think Gemini, at least one of them. I think Gemini is a custodian for one of them. I don't remember which one, and it's been a while, so don't quote me on that. But it's worth looking into. So that's
I'll look at that after the show. I'm super curious on that because it would be kind of like I feel like it would be a hard thing to get past Canadian regulators. Oh yeah, we let some American company hold all the Bitcoin that is supposed to be in our possession.
ShakePay have Coinbase self custody. Not self custody.
Maybe. I don't know what the legal deal is with all that. But
I don't know either.
Yeah. Okay, I'll make this one quick. Apple secures the rights to the Sam Bankman-Fried book from the Big Short author Michael Lewis. I'm looking forward to that. I've been dying to get like a better account of this story. I lived it. I had money in FTX. I followed all the stuff that's going on, but I'm excited to see what they do with the written property of this. This story hasn't really concluded yet. The guy's
not even close.
Bouncing around prison cells. And he's got a big court case in October. But yeah, October 3rd is when the book releases, which is the day that SBF's criminal trial in New York begins. So I'm sure that was a really smart, intentional choice. I'm sure we'll be hearing lots about FTX in October.
This whole story is crazy, right? Like this is proof that real life is stranger than fiction.
Oh,
like
totally.
This FTX stuff, like I haven't dove deep down the FTX rabbit hole. Like shitcoiners do shitcoin things. I'm kind of sitting back, kind of watching, like the meme of the guy eating the popcorn.
Yeah.
But that being said, like this plays out like a movie script already. Like this book wrote itself. Like this book wrote itself. Like,
well, Michael Lewis was saying, because he was with SBF for like 2 years before the crash. And he was saying, man, the hardest thing about this story is like, I don't know how to end it. And he was like, he was kind of gathering his notes and all that stuff. He was following SBF for like a year. And then I think in like October, he went, to his office to start writing this thing. And then the collapse happens in November. And he's like, oh, I have my ending now.
Well, so who knows how this is going to end? Like this is wild. Like this is a really, really wild story.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that really stinks that I talk about with my girlfriend is how he funneled so much money to his parents during this whole thing. So like they were definitely culprits in all of this, and hopefully they get some jail time too. But yeah. All right. Oh man, we're riffing here. I love it, but we got so many other stories. But you know what? I'm gonna skip one here real quick, or I'll just glide over it. The Chinese government has now banned officials from using iPhones for work, which was part of the reason that Apple stock dropped somewhere around like 10% at one point this week. Which a stock dropping 10% in a week, not a big deal, right? Well, when a company is worth $3 trillion, that's like 300 billion of market cap. So that's almost all of Bitcoin's market cap that was wiped off from essentially this news story that I believe now is confirmed. It was a rumor for a bit, but now it's confirmed that government officials in China won't be able to use iPhones for work. Which you might think like, why is that such a big deal? Well, it turns out 60 million Chinese people work for the government. So that's like 2 Canadas almost worth of people who can't use iPhones now. So yeah, interesting.
Well, I mean, I saw this story, and my first impression was China don't exactly do a great job of keeping things banned after they ban it. I don't know what the enforcement on this type of thing is going to be. I mean, I'm not an Apple user, really, or a shareholder.
Yeah, I trade it, but yeah, I mean, I probably should have just bought and kept it. It's done pretty damn well over the last few years. So I heard something that like Warren Buffett, it's like 50+% of the Berkshire Hathaway portfolio is just Apple stock. So essentially, when you buy into Warren Buffett, you're just buying him sitting on his Apple stock. There's not much investment there. It's actually kind of similar if you look at the major indexes too, because the major indexes are like 23% Apple or something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's nuts.
So
the top
Apple,
7%,
and Microsoft, it's just like the whole economy essentially.
Yeah, the top 7 companies in the S&P 500 are
over 50%.
Ungodly. Yeah, it's an ungodly amount.
Well, and that's why, like Warren Buffett, he put out this challenge, I think back in 2008, and he said, I'm going to just buy the S&P 500 passive ETF, and I'll give $1 million to anyone who wants to challenge me that they can beat that return in 10 years. And he had a whole bunch of challengers on it, and not a single hedge fund was able to outpace the S&P 500 when you take fees out of it. And then I think they looked at the entirety of the of all hedge funds, and there was only one hedge fund that did publicly traded stocks that beat the S&P 500 10 years after 2008. Of all of Wall Street, basically the only one that minus fees was able to outperform the S&P 500. So active managers, the pros that we pay, not so pro, I guess. Okay, quick one here. This ties in maybe a little bit to Canada. China and Canada always feel like siblings in some ways when we talk about things like the housing market or currencies and whatnot. But the Chinese yuan has hit record lows for the past 16 years against the US dollar. And I had a little conspiracy theory about this. And you're an economist, or you do a lot of stuff in economics, and I'm just a YouTuber, filmmaker. But when I look at this and I think, oh man, so the Chinese yuan is losing value. I know that the way that the Chinese yuan works with the US dollar is it's pegged, but it's not pegged. Essentially, what the central bank does there is that, when the Chinese yuan is too strong, they essentially just sell it off, and then they buy more US dollars. And I believe when it's weak, they sell off their US dollars and treasury holdings and buy back the yuan. And so they sort of keep it in this like banded range, essentially, where they're okay with letting it move 1 to 2% a day or something. And if it ever goes over that, it's almost like a form of like yield curve control, where they just try and dampen the volatility by moving around their holdings. But I was thinking about this. We've heard the stories of essentially the Chinese economy is sort of going into recession. Something like 20% of people under 25 or 26 there are unemployed. We know that manufacturing numbers are really hitting lows. It kind of looks like they're heading towards a bit of a recession. And I was thinking, isn't it kind of in their benefit to have a weaker yuan, because that encourages other countries to import more from them? It gives them more purchasing power from within the country to have a weaker currency. And I got to think, like, is that a conspiracy that maybe they're letting this drop to 16-year lows to kind of stimulate their economy to get more exports moving?
What makes you think it's just starting now? Like, what makes you think that this hasn't been happening for 20 years? And what makes you think that China are not alone in this, in doing this? Now, China are a little bit unique in the peg, right? Like, that is a relatively unique thing. There's a few other countries that have pegs, but devaluing your currency is a tried and true way of boosting your economy. It boosts your exports. So of course they're doing it.
I wonder what that's going to mean for Chinese investors too, because I know that like China has been kind of waffly on letting, people on the mainland, Chinese citizens, invest internationally versus locally. But let's just say like you have a weakening currency. Isn't that going to drive more savings offshore as well?
In China's case, it's really hard to have stuff offshore, right? It's very difficult to do that. I don't know if I agree with you. I don't necessarily disagree, but I think that the weakening yuan is also a function of a strengthening dollar. Like the dollar has been doing very strong against almost all currencies, right? Maybe all of them over the past few months. So I think it's a little bit of a function of that as well. There is also a lot of signs out there that things are not going great in China right now. There are problems in their economy. So I'm not surprised to see that their economy not doing great and them wanting to relieve a little bit of the pressure off and try to stimulate as much as they can. But it's certainly not unique. There's nothing special about this specific time. Now that it's at 16-year lows, maybe that's something to look into a little bit like that. But this is something that's been done before.
Praveen brought up an interesting comment here. If the Chinese investors can buy and hold Canadian detached homes perpetually, then that can delay the Canadian real estate bubble pop. What do you think about that?
That may or may not have been happening for the past 20 years again, right? Like,
yeah, our little stimulus here. Speaking of which, I find this interesting. So the Bank of Canada this week announced that they will not be raising interest rates this month. Who knows about next month? But it's kind of been held steady here at 5%. Meantime, you have the finance minister, Krista Freeland, saying, my number one priority is to use all the tools at my disposal and to work with partners at other levels of government across Canada to ensure that interest rates can come down as soon as possible. If you know things about interest rates, they usually don't come down until unemployment starts to rise or inflation starts to turn into deflation. So I wonder what she means as to what she's going to do with her tools at her disposal. But I find this interesting because when I think about American politicians and I think about, like the Treasury Secretary, who actually used to work at the Fed, Janet Yellen in the US, there's this idea that like the Federal Reserve and the government are independent of one another, that you don't want the Federal Reserve to be politicized because essentially that can just mean that one party can change interest rates for political favor to win another election or whatever. We in the Bitcoin space, we know that's just one big joke, but they try and maintain some level of decorum of independence of these two institutions in the US. And meanwhile, you have Krista Freeland coming out here basically saying, yeah, we're going to strong arm the BOC because people's mortgage rates are getting a little bit too high. We know that, 24, 25, 26 are going to be really brutal years for everyone's 5-year mortgages to kind of turn over. You've already probably heard the stories of like people's mortgages going from $2,500 a month to, $6,000. As somebody who's worked in economics, like what do you think about all of this? Do you think that the Canadian government, the current government in power, is going to have any power to kind of sway interest rate decisions, or is this just something that has more to do with what the U.S. is doing with their interest rates than anything?
It is. You brought it up. The politicization of these institutions is very concerning, and it's not just Freeland. We had several premiers write letters to the Bank of Canada over the past couple of weeks, like asking them to don't raise rates. That is odd. That is not that's odd. The politicization of this stuff is not a good thing. It's also, since when is the Bank of Canada like a pulp culture thing? Interest rates now are something that the average person on the street talks about. The average person on the street 5 years ago would have no idea when the Bank of Canada were going to make a rate decision. And now it's a normal thing. People at the grocery store probably knew this, that the rates were happening this week. It's strange.
Here's a little Google Trends chart.
There you go.
No one gives a shit about interest rates for 5 years, and then they start ticking up. Everyone's talking about it.
Yeah. Even, I'm old enough to remember the Great Financial Crisis, and I think that happened so fast, and they dropped the rates so quickly that it wasn't like this, where what we have going on now is the inflation has been happening over a year or two, right? So it's given people time to feel it. So now they're very much aware of it. I don't like politicians getting involved in this stuff at all. I don't care if they're liberal, NDP, green, conservative. I want all politicians to stay clear of this stuff.
When Christopher Freeland like mentions levers, the one in like tools at their disposal, the one that immediately comes to mind, and I think a lot of people can kind of like feel this out, is immigration and immigration targets and like how many people we're going to admit into the country. Because there's let's just say there's pent up sustained demand for people to become Canadians from every country on earth. That's just kind of what happens when you're
Yeah.
part of the G7 and you're close to America and all that stuff. And that's been something that's been, now is being cited as maybe one of the main reasons that the housing market will never crash, or maybe one of the reasons that inflation is rampant and rent prices and all that. What do you think of that? Like, do you think it's good that we, or not good or bad, that we kind of discuss immigration as sort of like one of the levers for, you know, bullying the central bank in some way, or pushing it in one way or another?
It's supply demand. At the end of the day, it
Yeah.
becomes supply demand. If you increase the supply of people wanting, if you increase the demand for housing without increasing the amount of housing, prices are going to go
Hmm.
up. There's no way around it, right?
Hmm.
Um, what the proper level of immigration is, I have no idea, no clue. And immigration is not this textbook thing. It's not this clear cut thing either, right? Like there are places that probably do need immigration more than others, right? Like
Hmm.
there's labor shortage. I know we have a relatively low unemployment rate, but there are still labor shortages out there in the economy for specific jobs and specific
Yeah.
places. And
Well, like
increasing immigration
literal
addresses that.
labor intensive jobs are the ones with the massive shortages right now. Like construction, they're having the hardest time finding people for construction.
So some sort of targeted immigration towards the things that we need, that's fantastic. But do we need more and more people coming in and only going to a couple of cities where these cities are already incredibly overvalued, overpriced, and expensive already? And then do we have create some sort of incentive to bring newcomers to Canada, to have them go to places where they're needed more? I'm not quite sure. I don't know if that's
What
what
I
she was
find.
referring to at interest rates, though. Like that's a stretch to say that
Mhm.
the immigration is a lever for interest rates. Like that's potentially pretty scary. Like that's almost a threat to the Bank of Canada.
Well,
I would say, right?
the chair of the Central Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, he was saying that immigration has a direct effect on inflation, and their mandate is to get inflation down. So if you think about it, like, he's basically saying the federal government is sort of working against what our sole mandate is, which is to get inflation down, because of all the consumer demand that's just coming to the country at a record pace. So.
Well, it only makes sense. If you have more people in an economy, that economy is going to need more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It only makes sense. Like, so of course.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a, I've always said, like, the zoom out picture that us Bitcoiners believe is that housing has been commodified, and it's become too much of a store of value for people. And we've just been so accustomed to it going up, 8, 10, 20% a year, that why wouldn't you put almost all your net worth into it? And I had this conversation with some of my friends the other day. I said, you can't deprogram that in like 2 years or 3 years. You
No,
can't
no.
deprogram that with one housing crash. I think the only way that you take people out of this mindset, besides just getting rid of fiat currencies, is people have to have a prolonged bear market in housing to really get it out of their head that it just goes up forever. The same way that, like, Japan's economy has essentially had multiple lost decades. And I think if you look at the way that, Japanese people save and invest their money, they're not real estate crazy, because they've had generations of essentially real estate stagnation or losses. And, I don't know everything about, the economics of Japan, but that is basically the long-term system shock, short of just getting rid of fiat currencies, that people will need to get out of their heads that I got to have 2, 3, 4 homes. I got to put all my money into real estate. It's the foolproof investment, for generational wealth. It's very hard to deprogram that, in my opinion.
People are going to get burnt. People are getting
Yeah.
burnt right now. If you are
Hmm.
someone who has multiple mortgages and you have variable rates, you're
Yeah.
getting slammed. Like, you're getting absolutely slammed. And if you're in a place where that has rent control, like I know Toronto, most places in Ontario do, right? I think that there are kind of strict rules. I'm not quite sure about other provinces, but if you're in a place that has rent control, and you're leveraged up to your eyeballs with multiple mortgages on a variable rate, and you can't raise the rents of the people that are living in your places, you're going to feel some real pain. And I think we have access, we still have access to credit, and I think these people are kind of running on fumes, and it's going to wear out. Like it's and people are going to get hurt. Not financial advice, obviously. I don't give financial advice, but these are scary times if you're a real estate investor.
I think one of the challenges with like coming up with these policies for, you know, curbing the price of real estate, like Vancouver's just been a prime example that, you know, centralized planning of trying to stifle supply or demand doesn't quite work for real estate. It works maybe on the supply side. You can put in rules that make supply constricted, but it's really hard to curb demand when it comes to real
Yes.
estate. We've had all of these things, like we've had a home flippers tax and a no foreign buyers tax or no foreign buyers whatsoever. All of these, you know, speculation things in place, and they haven't done anything to curb demand in Vancouver. You know, some people
And they
say,
can,
"Oh, if they
and they
didn't
will
do any
raise
of that stuff, then house prices would be up 40% a year." And I'm
and
like,
they will
"Oh,
raise
I
the
don't think
prices
so."
even more. Like those taxes could
Yeah,
end up
yeah.
causing the prices to go up even more, right?
And it brings me back to the saying, which is essentially that everybody wants affordable housing, but nobody wants their house to be affordable. And
That's
so
well said. That's well said.
where I land on like what can we do short of getting rid of fiat currencies, because again, that's like a multi-generational feat. The thing short of that I think you could do to really shore up housing is we have to start building new
Absolutely.
towns and new cities, just like we did during the gold rush
Yes.
back
Yes.
in, you know, the 70s and 80s and 90s, which now all those towns are abandoned. Nobody wants to live in them. There's so much space in Canada, and I think entrepreneurs who have a lot of capital in their hands have an opportunity to create new housing and new communities for people that are outside these like core city centers. They do it
Yes.
in spades, like when you're around, like new community in Vancouver, new planned community here, right? Everybody wants to be close to transit. Everybody wants to be close to all these things, but there's a lot of space in Canada, and I think there's a lot of people who are fed up with the rat race and would take the loss of being, you know, super close to their neighbors, maybe 2-3 hours away, to live in a community where they could actually have a shot at home ownership or land
Yes.
ownership.
Yes.
And so I hope more entrepreneurs take that route, and I hope the government also starts pursuing that a little bit. I like Pierre Poilievre's plan, which is like we're going to sell a bunch of federal buildings and then we're going to take that money and build stuff close to transit lines. I think that's a good start. That's not going to fix it all in one swoop, but there's so many beautiful places like when you travel across this country that are not prone to absolutely insane weather events, that are still close enough to the American border and you know, within 2-3 hours of cities, where you can buy parcels of land for like, you know, $300,000 for 100+ acres.
And we
And
need to make building more. We got to remove the red tape when it comes to building.
you got to remove the
Like
red tape. We've got to have that
governments.
pioneer spirit, though. You can remove the red tape, but you've got to still encourage people to go out and
Yeah.
start, you
Yeah.
know, building these
That is the
things
only way
too.
out of this is we have to build more energy, more houses, more.
Yep.
Like
Energy is such a big part of it too, man. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much. I think that's everything. We got everything. It's hour 20 minutes. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. Boomer, any last words? Where can people find you? What are you looking forward to in the next few weeks? Anything news related or personal related?
The ruler's broken on Twitter. Follow me there. I host a meetup in
That's a
Ottawa. So
perfect handle.
If you're in the Ottawa area, definitely go to check us out. Ottawa BTC meetup, or just check Capital Bitcoiners on Twitter. Going to a concert tonight. So like I'm going like a local Bitcoiner, semi-local, like he's in Kingston. So I'm driving out to Kingston right now. His band is playing in a concert, an outdoor concert. So looking forward to that tonight. Thank you for having me. It was an honor. I'm a fan of your work. I'm a big fan of your work. I think I said it to you before the show, and I'll say it in front of everybody here so everybody can hear. Like what you're doing with these short clips that you're making, with these little TikTok videos, they are incredibly high quality, incredibly high signal, Bitcoin only, and you are going to be personally responsible for bringing in a lot of people in the next bull market. And
I appreciate that.
and you know, it's an honor to help you out. I'll come on anytime you want. Anytime you need someone to throw some ideas with or chat with, like you know, it's an honor to be a part of this, and you know, keep doing what you're doing.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate the comments. I had like such a nice humbling this week because I got a chance to screen the new film at this like Bitcoin meetup and had all these people coming up to me. But it's like the one thing that I hope, besides hopefully personally orange pilling people, is to get more Bitcoiners going out and putting themselves out there. And I know that, I believe, like, I messaged you right after the conference. I was like, you want to come on the
Yeah,
show? And you're like, I
yeah,
don't know if I'm quite ready to do it yet. And now you've done a couple of these live shows and you're out and you're such like a great speaker on this stuff. So I'd love to have you back. But if there's one thing that I can do is to get more Bitcoiners out there, orange pilling,
yes,
being a part of making content, finding out
yeah.
how they can bring their personal skills into this community. And yeah, really loved having you on, man. And we'll definitely have to do another show again sometime.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to pressure me into starting my own podcast or something like that. Sometimes I
Yeah,
need the motivation. I need
I
I
try.
need to
I
be
try and
pushed. We
push
all
people
do,
to
right?
think. I try and push
Yeah.
people to think outside the podcast, but for sure, in terms of a creating perspective, it's like the lowest barrier to entry. You just get a microphone and go off with friends, right? But yeah,
Let's
I mean,
all let's
anything,
just
right? It's
do
always a start.
exactly do something. Do something. Like start a meetup. Start a meetup in your local
Yeah,
community. Like start writing your ideas down, and throw it out there to some of the publications. Like absolutely anything. Like we are still so early, guys. Like if you're
mhm,
listening to this in 2023 when we're recording it, if you're listening to this close to live, you are incredibly early. And
yeah,
enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride, and try. Do what you can. Do what you can, and do what you're comfortable with.
awesome. I love it. I'll just leave that on that note. That's a perfect way to end the show. Thanks so much, Boomer. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you